today. We'll get underway here. Get a chance to get seated if you would like. Plenty of open seats.
How are you?
Are you? I don't never met you before. No, I don't recognize you at all. Not even the YouTube reunion, nothing.
First, I would like to introduce the members of our panel.
Just kidding.
On the far end, we have Skip Hosler from maintenance, Yeilding, one of our record-holding pilots, Randy Wolfgang from maintenance, McKim, RSO, and Gene Cowell from maintenance, and I'm Bledsoe, former SR-71 pilot. Again, welcome to our afternoon session. We will give you a brief introduction, some basic facts about the SR-71, and but first I would like each of our guys to tell us a little bit about his personal history and background and what he did with the SR-71 program. Skip, if you'd like to start, please.
Test. My name is Skip Hosler. I got on the SR-71s in 1972. I was 18 years old. I spent the first 6 years at field working in recovery and flight line. In my first 6 years there, Vietnam was still going on. I spent 1,150 days TDY, either to Milton Hall or Okinawa. I left Yeilding in 78 to McDill for 2 years, came back to Yeilding in 80 to 82, worked QA and flight line, and I spent the next 5 years in academia as OMS supervisor for the SRs there. Once I retired, I went to work for Lockheed for 9 years on the U-2s. Then later on, I left them to Northrop to work flight tests. And also, in my last 3 years in the military, I was on the Y-22 flight test program. That's about it. 40 years.
Ed, would you like to tell us about your history?
I'm Ed Yeilding from Florence, Alabama. Before the SR-71, I flew the F-4 Phantom for 9 years, the R-4 version and the fighter version of the Phantom. In my dream assignment, which I love flying the Phantom, but my dream assignment was flying the SR-71. I flew for 6 years. My last 2 years were in developmental flight test down in Palmdale. Had a total of 785 hours in the SR-71. After the Blackbird, flew VIPs out of Washington in the C-20 for 5 years, and then flew for the airlines, Northwest Airlines and Delta Airline for 13 years, and then retired from that.
Anything?
Yeah, I enlisted, delayed enlistment in the Air Force after St. Valentine's Day in 1968. During the summer, after I graduated from high school, I worked at Dow Chemical filling napalm bombs. And then I went to Lackland in September, did my basic training. In November, I went to Chanute for my technical training. And in March of '69, I came back home, got married, and then went to Beale. And all that time, I didn't know what I was going to be working on. Nobody knew about the SR-71 back then. And then when I got to Beale, I had to mop floors in the barracks for a while until my security clearance came through. And then I got down to the flight line. Initially, the instrument shop was in field maintenance service, or squadron. And then while I was doing a TDY to Okinawa, they switched it over AMS, so I came back from Okinawa, an E4, and I didn't know what shop I was in. And mainly my early time in the program, I did virtually every dirty job that the the instrument shop could come up with. I laid in JP7 in the main body fuel tank overnight, changed the spike position harness in the center body many times, removed the RSO's instrument panels to facilitate other maintenance for camera, and then I was either doing that or scheduling inlets all day long. So that, and I transferred, we had a family illness, and I transferred down here to March in 1971. And I got out 6 months early in 1972. So I was only with the program for a very short period of time. And
my volunteers.
that's kind of my history with the program.
Hi, I'm McKim. I was commissioned in the Air Force in 1970. And one of the things that Ed had this issue being in the Air Force, when you go to base personnel, they check your forms and going, oh, we changed your first name to Edward. No, my other name is Eddie, so change it back. But in my second assignment, my first assignment was B-52Ds here in March. It was my first PCS assignment as a navigator, and ended up flying 100 combat sorties in Vietnam in the OD model. And my follow-on assignment was to FB-111s at Plattsburgh. The SAC route was a typical route to the SR-71 for us navigators. But I picked up the nickname of ED in that squadron because we had, I believe, 6 hits. So when the squadron commander would scream out the first name, 5 or 6 guys would answer. So he had to pick up a nickname. So I came to the SR-71 program in 1980. Ended up flying quite a bit and loved the job. It's the best job I ever had. Pardon me? Anyway, when people ask you about the job, it was the best job I ever had, and they give them a lot of gas. So that was always really good. One of the things, I guess we all have a lot of stories. It's probably gotten around. You may have heard my name on the Smithsonian channel with Maury Rosenberg. We were unfortunately the last crew to be shot at by the North Koreans and didn't sustain any damage. So that was an interesting time. So I'm glad to be here. Good to see such a good turnout to still look at this old airplane. It's a fascinating airplane to me. It's a functional design which turned out beautiful, I think. No other aircraft still has the lines that this old airplane does. And the thing was interesting about it, you would see it from different perspectives, and you would sense the change that the aeronautical design of the airplane had. It was pretty fascinating. So that's it. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Eugene R. Cowell. From San Bernardino, California. I turned 18 years old and got a draft number 10.
Lucky 10.
And they said, come on down to LA and do the induction physical. I said, okay, so I went down there, and that was a big surprise. And they started going Army, Marine, Army, Marine, and stopped. I'm like, whew. Army through this door, Marines through this door, and all others go through this door. So I went through this door, and he says, well, Army's going to call you up in 2 weeks to go in the Army. I said, really? You're going to let me go home? Yeah, get on the bus. So I come to the bus and come down to Waterman with the Air Force recruiter. He said, what do I need to do to get in the Air Force? He says, well, here, take this test. So I took the test. I did good mechanics, accounting. I says, okay, so what's the deal? He says, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? I says, you're the sergeant. What do you think? He says, be a crew chief. That way they want to fly your airplane, and you have some control of it. It's cool. When can I go? This is the 18th of November, 71. He says, don't you want to stay for Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's? I said, no, sir. I want to go in the Air Force. So the 23rd of November, I got on a plane and went to Lackland, did good there, went to school up at Shepherd, did good there, came to Beale. And that's when I met Skip Hosler. We went there 72 at the same time. You got to go into maintenance, and I got to go into support. Support is where you take care of all the L2 cards, slots cards, docs cards, and tab cards. Well, I got to learn the tab, and that was a lot of fun. Very hazardous job. So I talked to the chief, and I says, Chief, I want to be a crew chief. He says, you got to be a master sergeant to be a crew chief. I says, well, then I'm leaving. What? You being sarcastic? No. They need crew chiefs in Lubang, Thailand, F4Ds. He said, that'd be good for you. I'll see you in a year. So I got assignment to go to Lubang, Thailand. Came down to George Air Force Base and did my F4 school. Went to Thailand, and yeah, that was a lot of work. Worked 24/7 during the Vietnam War. And then we did in-route support teams from Guam to Guam and also Hawaii. I got to go to Hawaii, and we had waves of 15, 20 airplanes at a time. We turned them overnight and sent them to the States and fixed them also. And so my buddies there said, so where are you going? I said, I'm going back to Beale. No, you're intact now. You're not going back to SAC. I said, well, that's what my chief told me. I'll be back. So we got our orders. Sure enough, going back to Beale. Beale looked at me and said, how in the heck did you do that? So my chief told me. He was a good chief. So I came back, worked flight line, went into phase dock, worked phase dock, and I got master crew chief, master technician. 93, I retired and went to work transfer alert. Also, I went to Amarillo, got an ASMTO and a minor in aviation safety. And they were doing activations of the SR at Edwards Air Force Base. So Ken Burns called me up and says, would you like to come to work for Lockheed on the SR-71? I said, yes, sir. So I did processing in Lockheed, Palmdale, and went from SR. John Regal is a crew chief. He's out on the ramp launching 967, and he did a good start and everything. He went up to check the IFR door, and he came down off the stairs and turned the power back on. I'm like, there's something wrong. Pat Murphy was a logic manager. And he says, what do you mean? I says, well, they're getting ready to abort. How do you know that? I says, did you guys replace the IFR receptacle last night? He said, yeah, how'd you know that? I says, well, they put that IFR door back on backwards, and it's not going to go up and flush through the board. So they shut down. Here comes Luloff and his RSO, Pat Murphy, you know. So they put the dang IFR door going backwards, huh? How in the heck did you know that? Gene told me. Hey, Gene, how you doing? Doing good. So we closed the program there, and I went on to do Joint Strike Fighter, Palmdale. We built the 2 articles and flew off against Boeing, won the program. Then I got to go to do the F-22 at Palmdale, and Utah was losing the F-15s, F-16s to their depot, and they wanted the F-22. So 2015, they asked me if I wanted to go to Utah. I said, no, sir, I'm retired and I'm 62 years old. But the big thing is, my team and I, 28 February 1990, we brought 975 down here and turned it over to the museum. And they've done an excellent job on the airplane. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
I didn't get to work on the airplane much. I was just a dumb pilot. But I started my Air Force career as an aviation cadet. Some of you may know what that is. They don't do that anymore. But I was in the next to the last class of aviation cadet pilots in the Air Force. Class 61F. 61G was the last one. And right after pilot training, I stayed in training command and became a UPT instructor, teaching you guys how to fly. Did that for a year with American students, and then they said, we need more instructors for the MAP students. And that was a mutual assistance program, which means mainly students from third world countries that the U.S. was teaching how to fly as part of our attempt to make more friends around the world. And this was in the early 60s, so well over half of our students were Vietnamese. That's an interesting experiences with them. Most of them were pretty sharp, but of course the big problem was language. Once they got fluent in enough English to absorb what was going on, they did pretty well. A lot of our other students were from Latin America. But after 3 years of teaching students to fly in the T-28, I decided I want to go back to being a jet pilot again. So I volunteered to go to Vietnam because the Air Force was promising that if you completed a successful tour in Vietnam as a volunteer, you could have your choice of assignment when you came back. So I volunteered to go over and fly A-1 Sky Raiders. My assignment finally came down, and instead of an O1, it said O, and instead of an A1, it said O1. And I went to personnel. I was Randolph at the time, so headquarters was right across the street. Said, there's a mistake here. I volunteered for A1s, and you give me an O1. He said, well, we got all the Sky Raider pilots we need. We need forward air controllers. Okay, so I went to Vietnam as a forward air controller, flying the O1 Bird Dog. But they followed through on their promise. When I came back, I went to Air Defense Command and became an F-106 pilot. And that's what finally got me the experience I needed to volunteer for the SR-71, which I did and got accepted. And spent 7 years at Beale flying the airplane, ended up as squadron commander, and then decided I needed a break from constant TDY, so I volunteered to be an air attaché, not really realizing what I was getting into. Basically, it's being a gentleman's spy. I ended up in Colombia, the country of Colombia, at the height of the drug wars, which was very interesting, as you might imagine. And after 2.5 years down there, went back to Beale as the wing DO for 3 years, and then decided to retire and become an airline pilot, which I did for 14 years, finally retiring from Alaska Airlines in 1999. Back then, they were forced you to retire at age 60, whether you wanted to or not. And so then, since then, I've enjoyed life in Prescott, Arizona. But my claim to fame is I'm pretty certain that I'm the only guy who flew combat missions in Vietnam in both the slowest and the fastest airplanes in the inventory. Okay, here's a picture of Ed McKim with his pilot, Maury Rosenberg, who actually...
I can't see the screen, but I can see the reflection.
Yeah, they were both a little bit younger then. Maury had wanted to come. Unfortunately, he's on a river cruise in Europe right now, so he couldn't make it. Come on. Technical assistance. Oh, there we go. Okay, here's Randy. these pictures of us when we were younger, much younger.
That's it.
Yeah, that's me and John Thor. Unfortunately, John has terminal cancer and he couldn't make it. By the way, that figure is wrong. The final official figure is 2,092 miles an hour. Close enough. Okay, yeah. The tanker crews like to say, when we bragged about being faster than a 30-06 bullet, that we'd probably have about the same range if they weren't there to support us, which is probably true. We depended on our tankers a lot, on every mission, in fact. Like one of the guys said in the earlier presentation, refueling was a tricky operation because you first hooked up, no problem, you're light on fuel. But we literally doubled our gross weight during refueling. So by the time we got to the end of the refueling track, the tanker was going as fast as he could go, and we were going as slow as we could go. So there was not much room for error there. All right, we're going to make this an interactive program, and we're going to open it up to questions now. I'll try to direct your question to the panel member who's most qualified to answer it. Any questions? Yes, sir.
You just said you were shot at?
Yes.
When was that? Can you describe it?
August the 12th, 1982, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I don't remember. Actually, that event was unfortunate in many ways, but fortunate for Maury and I. We didn't suffer any damage, nor did the airplane. We used to fly a mission across the DMZ in Korea, collecting information in international territory, by the way. And it was a mission that flew east to west and then west to east. We called it the bow tie because you made a 90-270 on each end. And the fourth pass across the DMZ that day, they shot an SA-2 missile at us. And our ECM on board was doing its job perfectly and displaced the false target to the right of our actual aircraft. And the missile missed it. I did see it go off at 3 o'clock from our position. It was a really ugly gray cloud of missile debris. We learned later from the intel guys they'd actually shot 3 missiles. One of them didn't stage and the other one blew up on the rails coming off. But the third one got to altitude and we saw it. It was yes, sir.
It's my understanding that the SR-71, when it went on missions in the Soviet Union, was very careful to avoid flying directly over the Soviet Union and skip along the border. Were you that careful on this mission?
We did not overfly Russian territory. We had sensors that could stand off in international territory and look in country, if you will, at certain angles and certain distances, but we didn't overfly. That was an edict after Gary Powers was shot down by President Eisenhower.
On the Korean mission, did you stay South Korean side of the DMZ?
Yes, we were in international territory south of the DMZ.
Can you repeat the question over the mic?
Oh, I'm sorry. He asked me about the event where we were shot at over the DMZ in Korea by the North Koreans by a surface-to-air missile in August of 1982. And I was explaining to him the sequence of events from the cockpit that we observed. That was the question. Did you get the answer? Okay, good. That answer your question, sir?
Not quite. What was it, a surface-to-air missile or from a airplane?
It was a surface-air missile, SA-2, Russian, the latest model. The intel guy said it wouldn't go to our altitude, but we had an update for him.
Not good.
Yes, sir.
I have two questions. Did anybody here or in the audience fly early 80s for the Point Mugu Air Show?
Magoo Air Show?
Point Mugu?
I flew in the air show at Point Mugu, and that would have been around 1984.
Probably. You did 3 passes?
Yes, that's
Yeah,
correct.
you did one level, one dragon, and the other one you just lit up.
Right. Yeah, that was the first time I ever had a chance to show the airplane at an air show, so that was really an honor. They told me later that it's a Navy base. They said the newspaper headline was Air Force steals air show.
That didn't go over well, did it?
And they said also performing were the Blue Angels.
Did you get dinner that night?
Navy guys love you,
I'm just interested in the radar cross section of. They say the SR-71 was the first stealth aircraft supposedly. Did that have to do with partially because of the heat that it generated, or was that just the radar absorption coating or the shape or any of that?
Question was about radar cross section and what was the reason for it? Well, there were two main reasons. Number one was the shape of the airplane. If you look at a model, you see that there's several features that are used in later purpose-built stealth airplane. In other words, the wing blended into the body, the rudders canted in at the top, and so forth. But it also had radar-absorbing materials built into the leading edges of the wings and the rudders. So it was probably the first attempt to build a stealth airplane, and fairly successful, not nearly as stealthy as some of the current airplanes, but the radar cross-section was probably more like something like a Piper Cub instead of the size of the airplane it actually is.
So the heat didn't play anything into it, it did make it more stealthy because it was hot in that temperature. Yeah,
No, heat had nothing to do with it, no.
Those of us, pardon me, for those of us who landed away occasionally, particularly if you got what we call the radar control approach from the controllers in the radar shack at the airdrome, usually if the guys came out to see it, we'd offer a few static displays. Guys would come out from the radar shack and they're going, man, this is a big airplane. First time they'd seen it, because when they saw it on radar, it was small.
Do we know what the RCS or whatever what it is on that?
There's a guy right there who can tell you that.
Oh.
What is it, DC?
Oh, I have no idea.
I don't know, you won't tell us.
It's been said, just like Pat said, the equivalent of a Cub or a Cessna 150.
Yeah, so it wasn't really what we consider stealth airplanes nowadays, with much smaller radar cross-section than you would expect for an airplane that big. Yeah, Don?
When I went to engineering school, went to work on a VGO model. I went to RCS school, James Madison University, and the SR-71, they teach the first stealth aircraft ever designed.
In case those of you couldn't hear it in the back, when he went to the school, James Madison University, in an engineering course, they considered the SR-71 the first real stealth airplane. Yes, sir.
I think it was in Sweden. There was an issue with the aircraft, and they got led down to the airbase somewhere in Sweden. Is anybody here?
Norway.
Was it Norway?
Yeah, you're probably referring to the case where they lost an engine on a mission over the Baltic Sea. and the Swedes came out and intercepted them to
and escorted them.
protect them from the Russians who were trying to force them into Russian airspace.
Right.
Yeah, and they,
Are there any pilots or RSOs here that were on that aircraft?
no, I don't think so, no.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I just wondered if Ed Yeilding had any stories about flying cross country over to DC.
Well, that's a pretty good story. You want to go with that, Ed?
Well, I was very, very fortunate to be asked to deliver an airplane to the Smithsonian when the Congress decided to retire the airplane in late 1989. So Don Emmons, my commander at the time, said, Ed, I want you and JTB to deliver the airplane to the Smithsonian. And the Smithsonian wrote a letter to the Secretary of the Air Force, who was Donald Rice at the time, and they said, when your pilot brings the airplane to the Smithsonian, please have him set an official coast-to-coast speed record, and that will call the public's attention to what a great airplane it's been for our country for 25 years. So JT and I were extremely fortunate to be asked to fly that mission. That mission could have been flown by any of the crew members who were qualified at the time, so we were just very, very fortunate to fly that mission. So Don Emmons said, Ed, when you fly across the East Coast, you can tell the media that you flew from coast to coast, or you can tell the media that you flew from sea to shining sea in just over an hour. So that got me to thinking about one of my favorite hymns, America the Beautiful. So anyway, we took off, JT and I, and by the way, I want to tell you, JT, he would have loved to have been here, but he passed away with cancer 2.5 years after our 1990 mission, and we sure miss him. He was a great RSO, and he had more time in the airplane than any other crew member in history. He had 1,392.7 hours in the airplane, more than any pilot or RSO. And by the way, we've got the high-time pilot here, B.C. Thomas, 1,217.2, was it?
0.3.
So, yeah, B.C. is a high-time pilot. Anyway, we took off on March the 6th, 1990, flew out over the Pacific, air refueled, got a full load of fuel, got a 200-mile running start to the coastline. The NAA is the agency that monitors and verifies official records. They got our time as we crossed the West Coast. And by the way, we would love to have flown the entire cruise at top speed, but we didn't have enough fuel to cross the East Coast at top speed and turn around and land at Dulles. So we had to plan it so that we crossed the West Coast, accelerating through Mach 2.5, and then on the east end, we had to come out of Burma just before Washington, D.C., and across the East Coast in the descending left-hand turn. But anyway, it was just, it was a special flight, so it's having special thoughts across our country. Thought about, as we crossed about 60 miles south Pikes Peak, and top of Pikes Peak is where Catherine Bates was inspired to write that wonderful song, America the Beautiful. And then just a few minutes later, we're going right over that frigate plain that she sang about in her song, and thought about our brave pioneers crossing that same country just 150 years earlier, taking months to cross country that JT and I were crossing in just a matter of minutes. We had been given permission to cruise at our top speed, Mach 3.3. Ordinarily, we weren't not allowed to fly faster than 3.2, but Don Emmons gave me permission to fly Mach 3.3, and that day was 2,190 miles an hour. Then as we crossed the East Coast, Kelly Johnson's beautiful Blackbird had just flown sea to shining sea faster than any airplane has ever before, then, or since. So it still holds that record, 67 minutes and 54 seconds. They also wanted 3 city-to-city records, and the one that is you would think that a city-to-city record ought to be from takeoff to landing, but that's not how the NAA does it. As you pass the city at speed, they start the time, and then as you pass the destination city, they get the time. So we were on that coast-to-coast record, we were able to do 3 city-to-city records, and the one that's quoted most often is LA to DC, and that's 64 minutes and 20 seconds. Anyway, we're extremely fortunate to fly that mission. By the way, a couple of days later, JT and I had to board an airplane and fly back to Los Angeles to come back to our base, and they put us on United Airlines 767, and our seats were in between those 2 aisles of that huge airplane. And it was a nonstop flight from Dulles to Los Angeles, and it was a good flight and all, and the service was nice, but gosh, it took 5 hours to get back to
Thanks, Dave. Yes.
I want to touch on that in a second, but I just wanted to thank you for your service as amazing parents. Thank you. Touching on what you said, and when you fly now, whether it's GA or airline or whatever, it just seems really
She asked me if whenever I'm flying now, does it seem really, really slow? Yes, it does seem really slow. But anything that flies, I love it. So I always love it being airborne. I've also got my little Citabria now, and I fly that. It's really slow. But I enjoy it. Only problem is nowadays I'm having to pay for my own gasoline.
Anybody have a question?
Somebody must want to know how you go to the bathroom.
How do you go to the bathroom?
You tell.
You're good. Since I brought it up with my big mouth. We had a vice in the suit, and you can see these suits out here are representative of what we flew in. David Clark, they were manufacturer of the suits. And they had a facility, and so the guys could go number 1 in the suit. But it was a learning technique, trust me, but you couldn't relieve yourself in the room. So you had to remember you weren't wearing that when you went home from the club on Friday night. Don't make that mistake.
Excuse me, can I add to that? There was one individual that actually pooped the suit.
Oh, here it is. Are they?
I didn't have to clean it up.
PSD guys took care of that. Physiological support division. Yes, sir.
After a mission, what would you say was the most maintenance-intensive part of the aircraft that had to be serviced?
No, he wants to know the most maintenance-intensive part of the airplane after a flight.
Well, if it came back, the minute you looked at the turkey feathers, if they were blowing out, it means you had unstruts. So that was work intensive, they were labor intensive to do that. First thing you did, he would land, shut down, you do flight control checks and stuff on it. First thing was service oil, that was immediate within 30 minutes. But other than that, it was very easy to maintain, all the stuff was relatively simple. There were jobs we didn't like that happened with it, where, this is talk about spice schedules. Before they went to DAFIX, the digital system, they might spend 24 hours or 40 hours straight with 2 test stands running flight control, trying to get the spikes and the schedule done manually versus the computer. And other things like if you landed too hot, so when he would fly around, he would come in, make do a couple of loops prior with the gear down, that cooled down the gear. Well, sometimes they landed too hot, the strut extended when it hit it, the strut sealed. So now you've got this aircraft that's leaking fluid all over the brakes, taxiing in. But then to fix it, you've got to jack it up, take the center of axle out, rotate the main landing gear tires, and you wrap a cargo strap around the piston, and you rotate the gear, track the gear in, you pull up the strut, the piston out of the strut. And you don't want to drop it, because everything is there. You got all three wheels and everything. But overall, maintenance on it, if it was a good airplane, it was very simple to maintain. It's just when stuff broke, so it would turn bad.
I just wanted to add a comment. All of us guys in the cockpit, local maintenance guys, they say their butts every day, and they were always there to get the airplane ready. The other thing from the cockpit perspective, this is a very challenging airplane because most of your job was watching it. So it was a mental task that you had to try to, as we always said, stay ahead of the airplane. And going 33 miles a minute, that's pretty challenging sometimes. We've always joked, at least from the back seat, you've never been lost till you've been lost at Mach 3. But when you got back from just like a routine sortie, it would wear you out mentally, as opposed to being other airplanes like early fighters, World War II airplanes, which were a physical airplane. I would say this was more of a mental airplane than anything, and it was very challenging to try to stay up with that.
And adding a comment to that, it's the only airplane I've ever flown where the pilot could never sit back and relax. You couldn't just put it on autopilot and let it go. It didn't work that way. Go ahead.
So in the 73 time frame, we were flying out of Seymour, Johnson, South Carolina. So Israel, Egypt was having issues. We had Kissinger in Washington. So we prepped 2 SRs for flight for a nighttime mission, fly from Seymour, Johnson to Egypt and back in 12 hours. The deal was, you got 2 airplanes sitting there, they're fully loaded with gas, with LN2 on board, you're leaking fuel everywhere. They would cancel the mission and cruise show. So now we have to defuel 2 trucks, 1 truck off each aircraft to get the fuel load down, drain 400 liters of liquid nitrogen, and get rid of that. They did that 2 nights in a row. That's when it gets labor intensive, and you get mad when they cancel.
Yes, sir.
I have 2 questions. First of all, what is the low residue diet, and why is it? What's the purpose of it? Low residue diet. Okay,
well, yeah, we got what we call a high protein, low residue meal before a flight. Normally steak and eggs, something like that. It was to give you lots of energy and to be able to complete the mission without too much residue for obvious reasons.
The second question is, what is the DEFCON box?
To which?
The DEFCON box.
DEFCON box?
How does it work?
You might be talking about a defensive system instead of...
You're talking about the electronic countermeasures or what?
Correct.
Well, there were several different versions. You'd like to go into that, A.D.?
There was the primary defensive mechanism of the airplane, of course, was speed. We could outrun most adversaries, most missiles, most manned aircraft. But we did have other supplemental device mechanisms. We didn't have any guns, or we didn't carry chaff or anything like that, like the fighters did. But we did have electronic countermeasures on the aircraft, and the day that Lori and I got shot at was a prime example of how sophisticated that system was. Because for the most part, it was passive. You didn't know it was there, but it would come on if needed to try to protect the airplane from an adversary if they got that close or got a radar contact on it.
Did you guys ever take off at maximum gross weight, or did you just take off with partial fuel and hit a tanker after?
We nearly always took off about half loaded of fuel for safety reasons. If we were fully loaded, just lifting off, lost an engine at that slow speed and that heavy weight, might not be able to control the airplane. For safety, we took off about half loaded of fuel, climbed to 25,000 feet, and joined with a tanker and air refuel. I heard that there was several takeoffs from Palmdale before my time there that were fully loaded. Is that correct, BC?
Yes, yeah.
Did you, he said yes, did you fly one of those fully loaded?
Yes, I did, and there's I think it's about a 3-minute video on YouTube that shows a fully loaded SR-71 taking off from Palmdale.
Okay, BC said that on YouTube there's a 3-minute video of a fully loaded SR taking off from
3 minutes.
From Palmdale, fully loaded. Well, if you go to YouTube, what's the best thing to search for?
It's on my channel, BC Thomas.
Okay, so enter BC Thomas, give it a search. Okay, Mike Relchi, you got a comment on it?
Real quick, I shot that video that's on there.
That's right.
And you can actually feel the bow wave. He was so low and so fast, the bow wave hit you first. And if you look at the video, as he goes past overhead, the film actually starts to rip a little bit just from the vibrations. And then the rocks start kicking up and hitting you from the exhaust as he goes past you. So it's quite an experience to do it.
That was dangerous, taking on heavy weight. It required a top-notch pilot, that's for sure.
Cal Jewett told me one time, he said, you don't have to stand down there and do that.
Oh, he said that. Thank you, Mike.
My understanding was there were some of the Korean missions of that. Kick off, no refueling by the Korean mission in that.
Yeah, that's probably true, but when we have a long mission like that, I don't know of any case where we took off with full fuel. We might go with a 65,000 pound fuel.
Yo-yo or whatever they call it.
Yeah, we did that for our record-setting missions. Beale in 1976, we took off with 65,000 pounds of fuel, so we didn't have to refuel for the mission. Yes, sir.
I was curious, what's your feelings on Ben Rich? Just out of curiosity, like, as a person, I know he's, no longer with us. Ben Rich? Yeah. Did you get to meet him? I assume as pilots, you guys kind of were involved with him.
Okay. Yeah, I guess a couple of us can answer that. My first meeting with Ben Rich was over in England at an air show. I was brand new in the program. This would have been around 1984. And so somebody introduced me to Ben Rich. And in the conversation, I said, "Sir, I really like your tie." It was a tie and had SR-71. So he said, "Well, here, you can have it." He took it off. I couldn't turn it down. He insisted that I take his tie, which ingratiated him to me. And he was just always very personable. Always had a few jokes to tell. Just a delightful guy to know.
He was indeed one of my cherished articles from being in the SR program. You got your choice of an aircraft photograph frame when you retired or separated. Mine is signed both by Ben Rich and Kelly Johnson, so I really treasure that. But Ben was a very interesting character, a very intellectual guy. He designed the inlets with the slide rule, as the aircraft was designed with the slide rule. But Ben usually traveled with a security expert from the company because he would get a little talkative. And then the security guy would open his briefcase and go, "Sign this."
For those of you who may not know who Ben Rich was, he was the genius who designed the inlet propulsion system on the airplane and then succeeded Kelly Johnson as head of the Skunk Works.
Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask, what was the average cost per hour to fly the plane back then, and what would that equate to in the days?
I retired from the Air Force in 1985. The figure floating around then was $75,000 per flight hour. I can't verify that that's true, but that was the accepted figure. But That figure not only included the direct operating cost, it also included depot level maintenance, tanker support, film processing, the whole deal.
What's the youngest age of a pilot ever for the SR?
Well, I don't know, but I would guess probably maybe late 20s. It probably took at least that long to get the required experience. You know, later on, the first batch of pilots were mostly all SAC guys from the B-58 or the U-2. And then later on, we started getting fighter pilots.
Did any of the A-12 pilots continue with this?
Yes. Ken Collins for one. And Dennis Sullivan, I think, may have flown the airplane briefly as an SR-71 crew member, but he was the wing DO when I got there, I think, so he wasn't an active crew member. But I'm pretty sure Ken Collins flew the A-12 and then got at least a couple hundred hours in the SR-71.
So you had mentioned yo-yo. So what happens on that?
Can't hear you, Pete.
So the normal flight load for an SR usually is 45,000 pounds. So the crew gets there, you put the LO2 on board. By the time they can finish that up, pushing the breakers, CBA goes up and they're off and running. They're going to go catch a tanker. If they're going to go hot before that, you do a yo-yo. You take it up to 80,000 pounds, but on a 45 load, the fuel's out of the wings. There's nothing in 6A or B or above tank 3 in the wing root. The minute you put 65 on board, you check with the pilot and crew brief what he wants. So depending on the plane, everybody says, oh, this airplane leaks. Yeah, it does. So depending on the airplane, I go into crew brief and he says, well, I want to have 68,000 pounds by the time we're reaching the runway.
Right.
We could lose 6,000 pounds in an hour sitting in the hangar. So we put 72,000 on board and hope you had that when you got there. But at that same time, you've already put nitrogen on board, the breakers are in, the tanks are pressurized, this thing is leaking everywhere. At Kadena, we have fuel drains in the floor, in front and back, and it's recycled to the locals. I've got a video on my phone that shows us squeezing out fuel into the fuel drains. We could lose 6,000 pounds in an hour. Put it down the airplane.
What was the approach speed at max landing weight for that jet?
Oh, we normally landed with about 10,000 pounds of fuel remaining. That's what we were shooting for. An approach speed would be 175 knots and touchdown speed somewhere between 155 and 160. And just by coincidence, that's also the same approach speed used by the Concorde. I talked to the Concorde, the British Airways Chief Concorde pilot a few years ago, and he was giving a briefing at Embry-Riddle in Prescott, Arizona, and we compared notes and found out that the takeoff speeds and landing speeds were almost identical, except that they were taking off the full fuel load, of course, and we were taking off normally with a reduced fuel load. Yes?
What were a couple of your biggest challenges flying the SR-71?
Go ahead.
What were some of our biggest challenges in flying the SR-71? I'd say the biggest challenge was constantly checking over all the systems and indicators in the cockpit, because if something started going wrong, you got to catch it real quick or you could get in big trouble in a hurry. So I think keeping that cross-check was probably the biggest challenge. Air refueling was always a challenge, especially if there's weather, turbulence, and at night, it was especially challenging. As you join up with the tanker's going pretty slow, and after we hooked up and the tanker's getting lighter, he was able to accelerate to his maximum speed, which I understand was about 350 indicated. And so as we were getting full with fuel, we were behind the power curve, so to speak. We were behind the power curve. And so when you're behind the power curve, it takes more and more power as you get slower. And so as we were approaching full fuel, we'd have both throttles in maximum and military power, maximum military power. Then we needed to put one throttle in afterburner in order to be able to fly that slow speed behind the tanker. So we put one throttle in minimum afterburner, and you knew it was going to light in about a second and a half, and you had to immediately retard the other throttle to keep from going too fast behind and having a disconnect behind the tanker. So we had asymmetric thrust then, which caused the airplane to be in a slight bank during the refueling. So we took a lot of pride in being good at air refueling. And part of the air refueling challenge too was for the RSO in the back seat. He would, and you can tell him about this, ED, he had to have the tanker modify the pumps during the refueling.
Comment that the other thing I found very challenging about this airplane is what all of us crew members and anybody who flies an airplane calls pacing. And that's keeping up with your job. The backseat led most of the pacing on the mission, and the front seat was concentrating on aircraft performance and flying the airplane. We ran the sensors and navigation and fencing equipment, most of the checklists from the back seat. So you had to have a mindset of thinking faster than the airplane was flying, which was challenging. And of course, being a good strategic aircraft, we had a giant checklist which you had to fulfill. But it was an extremely important checklist because I think most of us and all the pilots concurred. This was a very unforgiving airplane. If you made a wrong diagnosis and you did the wrong thing first, you may not recover. So you had to be very diligent in running the checklist, particularly under emergency procedures, on how you conducted yourself and dealt with the pilot in the front seat to get to the right checklist and try to keep the airplane flying. So pacing for me as a backseater was the biggest challenge in the airplane, coming from two other aircraft that didn't fly nearly as fast as this aircraft. And that was, I would say, was one of the backseaters' biggest challenges. What we call pacing.
Just like to mention that in the case you did have an emergency and needed to land at the nearest suitable airfield, you did not look directly below you because it took roughly 250 miles to get down from your normal cruise altitude. So you had to keep a constant span around you, what's 250 miles over there or 250 miles up here where we might be able to land. You're not looking where you are right now. Yes.
So as far as the maintenance goes, did you guys have some kind of failure reporting codes that you had to go and check when the aircraft came back? And is that how you knew what's wrong with it? You didn't have to.
You want to answer this with MRS tapes?
The aircraft had a DMRS system on board, so they download the tapes, run the tapes, we read the tapes, and see if you had any problems with fuel.
Voice recording of the cockpit.
Yeah.
Oh, that's all it was, voice recording?
No, it shows you.
It had a default indication.
Oh.
Right, ADS is how they run, the brakes how they run, the fuel flow, and everything else.
So you actually had to record the data?
It is recorded.
It's recorded automatically.
Right, but you have to go and review it to see if it's wrong?
We review it. Yeah.
That's a lot of.
Yeah, George?
Real quick. It was possible the airplane could...
700 items measured on the MRS.
How many?
Over 700. Pressures, temperatures, attitude, altitudes, frequencies, voltages, everything is over 760 things on the MRS.
I
Yeah.
know, because I had to go through the temperatures of everything on every flight when we were doing flight testing, and they were hundreds of yards long, the data off the tubes.
Right, one thing with that is being a crew chief
After we were fighting.
over in Okinawa, you get to do a fuel plot run on the aircraft if we're going to do a hard mission the next day. So we have 25,000 pounds of fuel on board. We'd start both engines up, do flight control checks, we do brake checks, do IFR checks, nose wheel steering checks, and you have to run for 30 minutes for the MRS system to pick up all the fuel flow, hydro pressures, and everything else. And we do everything as a pilot would do prior to taxiing the aircraft. And that was a lot of fun. Wouldn't you think, Skip?
Think back, like with the engine shop after flight, they'd have their copy of MRS tapes. They laid it on the table and they had like a ruler that had their parameters on it. And they would slide that ruler down the MRS tape to see where it varied from what it should be. So all time consuming, but this is before internet and magic stuff with computers. So
Some of the current airplanes, like probably all of them, at least the jets, have something like the instrument panel in your car. You know, get an automatic warning light if something goes wrong. It's not that way in SR-71. In fact, it was designed back in the days when, 4 kilobytes of RAM was pretty sophisticated. One of the major modifications they had to do to the ANS system when it was adapted to use on the airplane, that's the inertial navigation system, was to increase the memory from the original 4 kilobytes to 16 kilobytes because it was originally designed to use on the, what do you call it, Skybolt missile, I think. What? Yeah, I think it was designed to use on B-52s or Vulcan bombers, and it was an intermediate range ballistic missile that had the astro-inertial navigation system on it, designed, it only had to go from one point to one other point, so it only needed 4 kilobytes of RAM. Of course, if you're going to use the same system for a mission going to multiple points with the capability to modify your flight plan and route, you need more memory. 16 kilobytes was the answer, which was a lot back then, because you have to remember the first integrated circuit was invented by Texas Instruments back in '58, I think it was, so it was brand new stuff. It's not like your smartphone, which has more computing power than the navigation computer they use on the Apollo spacecraft, which only had 32 kilobytes of RAM, by the way. It's just nothing nowadays. You might have 64 gigabytes on your phone.
So you talked about your fuel limit on landing. So at Kadena one time, you had this pilot come in, he's doing touch and goes, we're going to incident land. He taxis in, he shuts down the first motor, and we do flight control checks. During the flight control checks, the second motor stopped running. No fuel dump, no nothing. I get up in the cockpit, he had 9,200 pounds, every tank was empty. But as long as he was at 6.5 degrees nose up, he had fuel, but the minute he came down level, he ran out of gas inside the hangar. One more touch and go, he would have been done.
Like I said, we tried to land on 10,000 pounds of fuel. Yes, sir.
What tools did you have in the cockpit, the back of the front area for navigation?
Tools?
What tools did you have for navigation?
Where our primary navigation system was called an astro-inertial system. So if you understand normal inertial navigators, which most airplanes have, or had at least before GPS, they work pretty well, but they could drift off in position maybe a mile every hour of flight time. So the SR-71 used an inertial navigator, but it had an automatic star tracker that kept that inertial updated continuously. So you could fly for 12 hours and be maybe 100 feet off from where your system says it was going to be.
Did you have a moving map display?
We did, yes, but it was not electronic. It was actually a 35 millimeter film strip that ran through a little mini projector for the pilot to look at.
If you ever get a chance to go to the Smithsonian and you go upstairs at the Smithsonian, there's a display up there which has a actual unit from the aircraft, the ANS unit, which was made by Northrop Grumman. They have it on display in there, and it's for us navigators, it's a marvelous tool and pretty reliable. Not totally reliable, but very reliable. So.
I flew the airplane for 832 hours and never had an ANS failure. It always worked. Of course, it depended on being able to see the stars, so it was not being updated while you were on the boom, for example, because the boom went right over the window for the star tracker. But as long as you were above the clouds, it worked great.
If you guys remember your physics, it had a Cassegrain telescope in there and you could track stars during the daytime.
You could have the navigation computer had a star catalog with the 32 brightest stars. And it also had continuously updated positions of all the major planets, the sun and the moon, for example. So you didn't want to accidentally lock onto one of them when you were looking for a star. But yeah, like you said, on a normal clear day, you could taxi out of the hangar and it would immediately lock onto a star. Yes?
Because you had to qualify in the flight sim before you could actually fly the plane, after you flew the SR-71, did you ever go back to the flight sim?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Ed. Tell them about the simulator.
Yeah, the simulator was really worth its weight in gold as far as teaching us how to operate the aircraft, both normal procedures and malfunctions. So we spent a lot of time in the simulator, and we're glad we did, because a lot of times we would have a malfunction during flight, and we developed confidence that with those simulators, we developed confidence that we could handle anything that could possibly go wrong. So once we had that confidence, the airplane was just a pure joy to fly. I really loved flying the airplane. So after we were fully qualified, we still would have simulators and have an instructor feeding us malfunctions. By the way, one of my first instructors was B.C. Thomas. When I first got to the base, they said, "You better hope you don't get B.C. Thomas. He's a really wicked dog." And I did. I got B.C. Thomas, and he's sitting right back there. But during those very challenging simulator missions, it never occurred to me that he would someday become one of my best friends. And he is.
How stressful was it, and how long did it take you unwind from the mission?
I'm going to be careful there. Well, it was, as you heard me describe, it was a rather mental job. So you just had to be cautious about that and be mindful of that. We didn't do anything like sophisticated massages or steam rooms or anything like Jimmy did when he was flying with the Air Force and the famous SAC films. But you just had to be mindful of it, and there was a certain kind of winding down period, if you will, because even when everything went right, it was still a rather stressful experience that you had to be mindful of what you were doing. So there was a consideration for that indeed. Yes.
Yeah, I'd like to make one comment on that. For routine missions, like all the missions we flew over Vietnam, we didn't need particularly high-level clearance. But if we were flying someplace where we didn't normally fly, especially if it was a hostile country, it took clearance from the National Security Council to allow us to fly that mission. So we knew there was somebody up very high level watching what was happening, so you did not want to follow up. Yes, sir.
How many actual flight missions would you get, for example, in a month? I mean, not just operational, but the training missions. How often will you actually fly over the course of, say, a month?
I think it averages about 1.5 flights per week. So in between Blackbird flights at Beale, we had the T-38. It was much cheaper to fly, and with the T-38, we could keep up our pilot performance a little better. We could practice instrument procedures, formation flying, aerobatics, and the T-38 was a joy to fly in between the Blackbird flights.
Okay, a couple more questions and we need to cut it off. Yes, sir.
So a question for regarding refueling. Had a couple of KC-10 pilots refueled the operation a couple of times. 2 parts. Pilot, how do you feel flying behind that KC-10 envelope? And then the other one is for maintenance. The untold stories. We usually had an air spare with a maintenance package on board on our wing. Can that be better or worse for you guys?
KC-10? Maury Rosenberg and I got to fly the first sortie from... Okay, the question was, do you have any comments about refueling from the KC-10 aircraft? So I was just going to tell you a short story that Maury Rosenberg and I had the fortunate experience of being the first operational guys to refuel from the KC-10 after the flight test guys had certified the envelope and the speeds and all that stuff. Maury and I came down here to March to talk to the reserve guys who were flying the KC-10 at that time. And Maury was doing most of the talking with the boom operator, the new lights, the big airplane and everything. So the boom operator in closing told Maury, he said, now, I'll probably give you forward 5. And Maury turned to me and he said, he was sitting to go out to fly. Maury calls free contact, and the boomer goes, forward 5. It was a big airplane. But the thing for the backseater, which was brilliant, the aircraft tanker could monitor the offload to the receiver. Usually the backseater's job is to try to punch off at the end of AR by controlling the number of pumps that the guys had on from the tanker aircraft to the receiver. But the KC-10 was brilliant, and you would get the end AR and it would punch off at full tanks.
I think we got room for one more question.
Did the SR-71 have a navigation backup system like the Whiskey Compass? If so, did they use it?
We had normal TAC in, plus we had air-to-air TAC in, plus we had a secure comm radio that could give us distance to the tanker, and of course then normal backup instruments like Whiskey Compass and eyeballs and the map and so forth.
We did a fight against the KC-10s, refuel. We had Airplane 979 come back with part of your boom in our higher bar
Thank you.
Thanks for all your questions. We enjoyed talking to you. Now we got a brief film to show to close this up.
Everybody's mic off.
Dear Kelly, you and I have never met. I'm not a former SR-71 pilot or RSO. I wasn't a member of your design team at the Lockheed Skunk Works or on the assembly line that built the Blackbird. Nor was I a member of the Air Force at Beale, Yeilding, or Kadena, who kept the Blackbirds flying. I'm not even an airplane buff in the classic sense. I'm just a person that had the privilege of being around your SR-71 Blackbird, and it was an experience I will remember intensely for the rest of my life. There's just something about your Blackbird, Kelly, that words don't adequately describe. Anyone who has been near a Blackbird and felt its presence knows what I'm talking about. It's a feeling in your gut, and instantly you want to be part of it. Part of what I call the Blackbird family. Today, Kelly, you are being honored for your design work on the SR-71, and justly so. To me, the SR-71 is not only your greatest aircraft design, it is perhaps the greatest aircraft ever built. I've heard it said that you considered the Blackbird the most fascinating challenge of your career. No wonder. It was a design that was so advanced that everything that touched it had to be new. New manufacturing processes, new tools, new materials, a whole new approach. You built an operational stealth aircraft a decade before most of the world had even heard the term. It was a design so far ahead of its time that it retired before time could catch up with it. In times of crisis, the Blackbird provided 6 presidents with a unique and critical view of the world. The Blackbird served this country for just over a quarter of a century. In that entire time, it stood in a class of one. To me, the Blackbird is much more than a technical marvel. It's an airplane that gets inside you, an aircraft that causes the adrenaline to flow just by looking at it. Kelly, your Blackbird is the stuff that dreams are made of. It's the model plane sitting in a young child's room, proof that everything is possible, that the sky isn't the limit. And it's the poster hanging on the office wall of a middle-aged engineer, testimony that yes, even in the real world, miracles do occur. The SR-71 embodies all that excites people about aerospace. Its crew seems part pilot, part astronaut. The Blackbird itself appears part airplane, part spacecraft. The typical Blackbird fan is a cross-section of America. It's your grandfather, your niece, your son. It's the wide-eyed young kid that buys an aircraft book at the National Air and Space Museum. It's the family that traveled hundreds of miles to an air show just to see a Blackbird in person. It's the people on the Air Force Base that stopped what they were doing to watch an SR take off. Everyone, every time, no matter how many times they'd seen it before. And it's the pilot who last flew the Blackbird 20 years ago, who has the look in his eye that says, I flew the best aircraft ever made. A look that can barely contain the desire to get in an SR just one more time and light the burns. When Blackbird 972 made its final record-setting flight to Dallas Airport, I watched the television with mixed emotions. This was the Blackbird's final flight. An aircraft that was the very definition of speed and power, with flying away. But my sadness was tempered by the knowledge that this plane would now truly belong to the nation, coming to rest in the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. Now millions will be able to do what I have done. Be near a Blackbird, be part of the family. Kelly, in the years to come, whenever I want to experience your airplane's majesty, I will remember the time I spent with your Blackbird. The smell of JP7 fuel, the feel of it on the soles of my shoes, the sound of an air starter wind up, the TED ignite, and I'll put on the film that we shot during those incredible weeks in 1987. I'll watch it, feel it, be part of it again. Because in movies, Kelly, like in our memories, your Blackbird will fly forever. Congratulations, Kelly, and thank you. Devin Hawker, Assistant Cameraman, Blackbird, the movie.
Thanks to all of you for coming this afternoon.